Welcome to the Politics People. Today I'm talking to author, commentator, filmmaker, journalist, educationalist, free speech advocate. I'm very, very honoured to be talking to Toby Young. Thank you so much for doing this today and talking to me.
That's my pleasure, Paul.
You're a tough one. Literally, it took me the best part of an hour to figure out what the introduction was, because you've been on the commentating landscape now for a good few decades, and you seem to have moved from being a cultural commentator, which was what you very well known for, into more the political sphere. Have you moved into politics, or has politics moved into the cultural area?
Well, curiously, the first time I think I ever appeared as a sort of pundit on a chat show was in, I think, 1985. So what's that? 35 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was, and I was talking about, I was talking about Victoria Gillick, who at that time I think was, she was campaigning, I think, against doctors being able to prescribe contraception to girls under the age of 16 without consulting their parents. I think that was the issue. And she, or it may have been, and she was a Catholic, and she had lots of children, and she was an anti-abortion campaigner as well. So she was generally opposed to birth control. Anyway, so I was on this show with her, and the show was called, and the reason I was on it is because I was an Oxford student at the time, and I'd been in this Oxford debate in which I debated Victoria Gillick. So anyway, I was called onto this show, and it was called Central Weekend Live. And I remember going to Birmingham, I think, to film it. And it was on one of those regional ITV channels. And the funny thing was, the thing which makes it even memorable in my mind, apart from being the first show like that I ever did, is that one of the presenters, one of the hosts of this show was Anna Soubry.
Oh, what?
Who subsequently became a Conservative, and then I think a Change UK MP, and God knows what else, before she finally exited from British politics last year. But so I first met Anna Soubry 35 years ago, when she was the host of the first ever chat show I appeared on.
God, that is something for the record books. That's a pub trivia question for the future. Definitely.
You got a scoop there, Paul. I've never told anyone else that, so that's a scoop.
Coming to you exclusively from Los Angeles.
Sorry, is this just going to be broadcast in the US, not in the UK?
Oh, no, it's global. It's global. Yeah, we're all over the world.
Well, in that case, let's delete that anecdote about Anna Soubry, because no one outside the Westminster bubble will have heard of her, let alone Santa Monica. Good Lord.
I don't know. The Soubry Massive out in Venice are pretty hardcore, I'll be honest with you.
Well, for the benefit of those listeners who have no idea what I'm talking about, Anna Soubry was a Conservative MP who was passionately opposed to Britain's departure from the European Union, and campaigned very vigorously for it, particularly in 2019, and eventually fell out with the Conservative Party leadership, became an independent Conservative MP, stood as an independent, I believe, in the 2019 general election, and lost. And I dare say we'll hear more from her in due course. She was an articulate and energetic woman. But anyway, so that's who she is. Not of much interest to anyone who isn't familiar with the trivia of recent British politics, I'm afraid.
But anyway, that's what fuels.
Presumably you're going to chop this down, so you can just cut that out.
You don't know me very well. No, that's the trailer you've just recorded. I'm leading with that. No, it's the minutiae I'm more interested in. Look, the big battles are out there. People are hammer and tongs, and you with Piers Morgan in the morning. I like the who's stuffing your envelopes, and do you use like a postal machine, or do you actually use the adhesive stamps kind of interest? I'm in the
It's funny you should say that, Paul, because I did start a magazine on my kitchen table, like Jan Wenner. Was it Jan Wenner, the founder of Rolling Stone? Yeah. He founded it, I think, on his kitchen table. So me too, I founded mine on a kitchen table. It was called The Modern Review. I started it in 1991, and the kind of unique selling point was intellectuals and academics writing long scholarly pieces about people like Madonna and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And we called it Low Culture for Highbrow.
That's right.
And at the time, that formula at the time was, was more unusual than it is today, let's say. But I licked all the stamps myself. I sealed the envelopes myself. People subscribed. I would literally write down their name in a book with a pen. And when it came time to send out, that month's issue, I would write the address on with my hand. And I tried to, use different coloured pencils and sometimes write with my left hand just to create the impression that it was a vaster organisation than it really was. I would answer the phone and go, Modern Review. And they go, yeah, can I speak to Toby? I'll say, I'll just have to see if he's available. And, I'd put on some music and then come back to Toby Young speaking. But it was really just me sitting in a bedsit in Shepherd's Bush. But unlike Jan Wenner, it never moved out of the bedsit in Shepherd's Bush. It folded 4 years later. It was a success d'estime, but it wasn't a huge commercial success. So we ran out of money eventually. But yeah, we did pretty well. We produced about 21 issues over the course of our 4-year life, and it was influential in its way. I mean, one of the reasons we closed is because every other broadsheet newspaper and serious cultural magazine in Britain just duplicated that formula we'd come up with. So we weren't unique after 4 years. We were so successful. We were a victim of our own success.
Well, exactly. And look, the world of podcasts now is exactly that.
That's true. But one of the good things about the world of podcasting is there are far fewer barriers to entry. So, back then, actually setting up a magazine was quite a production. I had to drive to the printers somewhere outside Cambridge to print each issue. I would have to I'd have to use like glue to stick down the photographs. And, I had to employ an army of volunteers to kind of sub-edit the magazine to make sure, proofread it. But big production doing something like that. And to take it from, the small kind of mom and pop scale on which I originally set it up to a more kind of successful national scale. Whereas today, any idiot can start a podcast in their kitchen and they can break into the podcast charts. And I speak from experience here because me and my old university chum, James Dellingpole, we started a podcast about 5 years ago called London Calling, which is essentially him and me just kind of nattering away about contemporary issues. You talk a lot about politics and kind of popular culture, stuff we've been watching on TV, books we've been reading, but mainly politics. And it's now, in the top 30 in the British kind of news and current affairs podcast chart. I mean, it's just him and me, sitting in our garden sheds. But it's there's no kind of we spend almost nothing on production, as you will find out if you listen to it. But I mean, it's so very few barriers to entry now. So it's much easier, I think, if you've got a good product to take it to market.
And I suppose that's where I was kicking off with this idea that culture has become politics and politics has become culture now, because you found yourself to be in the political world, but without actually seemingly changing horses. I mean, you are still the recognisable Toby Young that I've grown to love and worship over the years. You're still saying the same stuff, but now it's become the world of politics. Is there any truth in my rambling question?
There's a sort of kernel. If you hack away the dirt, there's a diamond in there somewhere. I think I've always been. I started out, I guess, in my career writing about culture, writing about movies, about books, about TV shows, the theatre, and in the course of my career as a journalist, I've been a drama critic, I've been a film critic, I've been a video critic, I've been a food critic, and I moved away from that to writing about politics round about 2010, when I got kind of interested in education, and I set up what in the US you call charter schools. I set up what became the first charter school in England. So I got sort of I went down a kind of political rabbit hole with that, and I became quite politicized. That kind of red pilled me, as it were, and I became quite conservative. And now I've gone back to writing more about culture, partly because, we're in the midst of a culture war, and culture itself has become much more politicized. And as you say, the border between politics and culture is very porous now. But I'm now writing about culture but from a more political point of view, from a conservative point of view, but not in the kind of, I guess, not in the sense of, a bow-tied, bespectacled, balding art critic kind of railing against the horrors of abstract expressionism. I don't mean that kind of conservative cultural critic. I mean, a kind of more irreverent P.J. O'Rourke style conservative cultural critic, essentially kind of making kind of incorrect jokes about culture. Like, I guess my role model in this regard would be Ricky Gervais's opening monologue at the Golden Globes. That's the gold standard as far as I'm concerned.
Wasn't it though? Wasn't it? I mean, that was such a surprise how pithy and effective and laser targeted that thing was. I wasn't expecting it to be that good. I don't know about you.
No, it was. I just didn't think he'd be quite that bold. That was what was so refreshing and kind of exciting about it. But I think one of the interesting things about the culture war is it's kind of metastasized in the past decade or so, whereby lots of people who were on the left are now making common cause with people on the right. And I think they still occupy the same positions in the kind of along the same axis. But when it comes to woke culture, when it comes to the kind of social justice, intersectional woke world, they find themselves weirdly on the same side. So I'm very much on the same side as Ricky Gervais, but Ricky Gervais, I think, politically sees himself as on the left, whereas I'd see myself as on the right. Another good example is Andrew Doyle, the creator of Titania McGrath. He is, he's a staunch socialist, but he and I absolutely see eye to eye on a whole range of cultural questions. And there's been this kind of weird coalition that sprung up in opposition to this kind of puritanical, censorious, Maoist kind of collective, the kind of what was the regressive left and has now kind of become something even more kind of monstrous and unspeakable. But they are now the common enemy, I think. When we defeated them, when we pushed them back, we'll probably then retire to our respective camps. But for the time being, we've made common cause, and it's actually quite fun to hang out with people who used to be, your arch enemies, but who now you have quite a lot in common with, it turns out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the shift that seems to have happened. It's like the notion of left and right has, as you say, they've metastasized. We used to have left and right. It used to be about, well, I think benefits should be higher, for example, and whether unions should have this kind of influence or power, kind of tangible policy arguments that you could make. And now it seems to be we can have we can find common ground with people that used to traditionally be on the left, and I'm definitely from the right, because there's this whole generation that sort of want to take the levers of power and use them to shut down an opinion, regardless of what it is.
Yes.
It's that seems to be the new battleground. I mean, that's where you're now kind of exercised, isn't it?
Yes.
The free speech aspect of all this.
Exactly. I think the issue that unites many people on the right and the left who were former enemies is a common commitment to free speech. So even though most of the enemies of free speech, are now on the left. They used to be, on the conservative right, but not anymore. Now they're on the kind of censorious, Maoist, woke left. And there are some people who are on the left, but who don't subscribe to, the concepts of microaggressions and safe spaces and trigger warnings, and don't think that the curriculum should be decolonized and that white people should shut up and so on and so forth. They don't buy into that whole social justice intersectional package, but they still see themselves as on the left. And because they don't buy into it, because they are pro-free speech and don't think that people's voices should be shut down, however well-intentioned your reasons for wanting them shut them down, they are now making that there is now quite a lot that we have on the right that we have in common with them, I'm doing my bit. So I'm creating something called the Free Speech Union. I don't know when this will be broadcast, but by the time it's broadcast, it may well be up and running. As of today, we're hoping to launch it in the next couple of weeks. It's going to be a mass membership organization that protects the speech rights of its members. So if you're a member of the Free Speech Union and you are mobbed by a digital outrage mob, a Twitchfork mob on social media, we will use the same tactics against the ringleaders that they're using against you to make them think twice about the mob hatred, the crowd-sourced mobbing that they're whipping up to deal with someone they've identified as a dissenter, someone guilty of wrongthing. We'll use the same tactics on them that they're using on the people they're trying to cancel. If they start a petition or start circulating an open letter calling for some maverick or dissenter to be fired, we'll start a counter petition. We'll start another open letter. If you're fired or if you're disciplined and put through some kind of complaints procedure, we'll make sure that you're legally looked after. If your case goes to court, we'll crowdfund to help you pay your costs. We're also going to be we'll have a research arm. We're going to be commissioning papers from intellectuals and academics about how the law can be changed to strengthen free speech. And we'll also have an educational wing organizing debates and discussions, speakeasies in schools and universities and public spaces up and down the country to model how people can passionately disagree about really important, vital political issues, but in a courteous, mutually respectful, good-humoured way. So those are the kind of aims of the organisation. And anyone interested in getting involved, in joining, and we accept overseas members. So even though our main focus, even though our main focus will be on UK residents and protecting their speech rights, we will do what we can to protect people in other parts of the world. And if you're interested in joining, email me at info@freespeechunion.org, or go to the website freespeechunion.org and you can find out how to join more about the organisation. And we've signed up some fantastic people on the board of directors alongside me. We have Douglas Murray, author of The Madness of Crowds most recently, and a great warrior for intellectual freedom, a guy called Professor Nigel Bigger, Regius Professor of Moral Philosophy at Oxford, a fantastic young black free speech activist called Inaya Folarin, who works for Index on censorship. We've got some great people on our legal advisory council, including a former High Court judge. We've got an advisory council consisting of some real heavyweights, people like Michael Shermer, Claire Lehman, who set up Quillette in Australia. Over here, people like David Starkey, Matt Ridley, Andrew Roberts, Claire Fox. So we've got some great people who are helping me out. And I hope we can make a real impact. I hope we can actually push back some of the tide of this extraordinary, authoritarian, almost totalitarian censoriousness that's sweeping the land.
God, I think that's just such a brilliant endeavour. Well done. That's so public-spirited. That's going to be huge. That's going to be absolutely, and it's really needed.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope people. I mean, I think until now, a lot of the focus on defending free speech has been in universities, not just here, but across the Anglosphere. But partly because a lot of the kind of regressive left censoriousness originated in grievance studies departments, like gender studies departments and critical race studies departments. It's sort of postmodern neo-Marxist kind of gobbledygook is where it all kind of originates. But it's now spread into the corporate sector. It's spread across the public sector. It's spread into the mainstream media. It's like this kind of horrible virus, kind of a blob that's gradually consuming everything before it. But I think because of that, I'm hoping that, our servers will crash on day one. As soon as we open for membership, we're just going to be deluged with tens of thousands of people from across the United Kingdom saying, good, thank God. Finally, someone is trying to do something to protect people like me from having their livelihoods destroyed merely for articulating what are, fairly mainstream common sense points of view. So, yeah, I'm hoping it'll be really popular, but who knows? It's always hard to tell until you actually launch.
No, it's going to be massive. I mean, if the IT guy that does your Wi-Fi is the one that's doing the servers, they probably crash anyway. So don't take that as any indicator. But you and I are similar ages. It's like mid-60s kind of. You're like mid-60s, 63, 64, aren't you? Something like that. You were born?
Well, I was born in 63. I thought you were saying I was in my mid-60s. No, I was about to get quite cross there. No.
I had you mid-30s. No.
Certainly, that's what I to look at me. That's what you'd think.
Exactly. That's what
But no, I'm in my mid-50s.
Aren't you astonished? You've been a player in the media for decades, as we touched on earlier. But are you surprised that we've got to a place where you have to do what you're now doing, that you have to set up an actual organisation to protect free speech? I didn't see this coming. When I was through the 80s and 90s, I thought we were becoming more inclusive and we'd actually slain a lot of the dragons. We were brought up on the Crucible. We were brought up on the McCarthy era, how horrendous it was to ostracise people in society for just believing something, Well,
I agree. I mean, I'm shocked by how what is essentially McCarthyism has come roaring back to life, and if anything, the current climate of intolerance is more pernicious and more widespread than it was during the McCarthy period. That's surprising, and it's particularly surprising that it's largely originated on the left. You would think that having been, the fact that McCarthyites targeted the left, blacklisted people for being members of the Communist Party or for associating with members of the Communist Party, that would have taught them a vital lesson. But no, now that many of those people are in the ascendant politically and culturally and in the corporate world, they're now using all those tactics that we used to keep them down against their political opponents. So it's kind of that's quite disappointing. You didn't expect liberals to kind of embrace the tactics of Joe McCarthy, but my God, have they? But I think the other reason I think that there's a real need for an organisation like this is that the organisations that protected dissidents and mavericks and dissenters on the left for decades are not doing enough. They're not doing, in some cases, anything at all to protect other people who aren't part of their tribe, but who are now on the receiving end of this kind of boot. So, organizations like PEN, for instance, there was that, I think the turning point came with that dinner in New York a few years ago when PEN held a dinner to celebrate the editors at Charlie Hebdo after something like 11 members of staff had been kind of killed in cold blood by Islamist terrorists because they published those cartoons about Muhammad. And about half the members of PEN refused to come to the dinner honouring these editors because they thought it was, Islamophobic to honour these editors, and it would be upsetting kind of marginalised peoples or some such nonsense. And organisations like Amnesty in this country, Liberty, organisations that used to be fairly libertarian, used to stand up for civil liberties, have become completely captured by the woke left and are now completely ignoring what they were set up to do. You see it in America with the ACLU. The ACLU has now essentially become the kind of provisional wing of the kind of the wokerati. So the other set of organisations that are really falling down on the job are trade unions themselves. So the main trade union that looks after academics in the UK, called the UCU, have done almost nothing to protect gender-critical feminists. When gender-critical feminists challenge the kind of dogmas of the trans Taliban, they get death threats, they're no platformed, people throw things at them whenever they try and speak, they're drowned out by protesters. What does the UCU do to stand up for the rights of these members? And bear in mind, these are left-wing feminists that are being targeted in this way, largely by men, albeit trans women, but men nonetheless. I'll probably be no platform myself for saying that, but you know what I mean. Yeah. But they've done nothing to stand up for the rights of these members. They've really fallen down on the job. I think the General Secretary of the UCU actually called gender-critical feminist TERFs, actually used that pejorative to describe them. And generally speaking, trade unions, which once upon a time, back in the 19th century in the UK, one of the reasons that trade unions were set up was in order to protect the speech rights of their members. So their bosses couldn't fire them for protesting about low wages or for taking different political view to the ruling class. That was one of the reasons they were established. Now they do almost nothing to protect their members' free speech. And in one case, there's a guy called Paul Embry over here, a member of the Fire Brigade Union. He's just been fired for publicly supporting Brexit, fired from an officer position in his own trade union for dissenting from the kind of progressive orthodoxy within the union. It's sort of the way in which the direction that trade unions have taken is similar to the direction that many left-of-centre political parties have taken across the Anglosphere, but also across Europe. They've essentially deserted their working-class voters, been captured by the educated, middle-class, woke activist left, and are now kind of engines of censorship rather than liberation.
Do you think that it's worse in the UK than the US or Australia at this point, this kind of climate?
Yeah, I've compared notes with. There are quite a few activists in this kind of space, and I've compared notes, and we think the ranking goes like this. The UK is probably, across the Anglosphere, the country in which free speech is still best protected. After the UK, I think, comes the US. After the US comes Australia, and then Canada. Canada is at the bottom of the league table when it comes to free speech. I think the number of people more people I think are cancelled, per 1,000 of the population in Canada than anywhere else on the planet. It's got completely out of control in Canada to the extent that people, they're almost too frightened to fight back now. I think things are getting that way in the US, but they're not quite there yet, and they're not quite there yet here either. So we have to mobilize pretty quickly before things, before we become Canada, basically.
No, we really do. I've been in the States for since 2007, 13 years. And that really was the watershed year. The credit crunch, I think 2008 came, and it's just like it seems to be everything is heightened and accelerated since then. I was only asking about the distinction between the UK, US, Australia, etc. Because there still is a vestige of hope in the US. I think there's a notion of people. There's a natural suspicion, even from the left and right, about the power of government, about the encroachment of government power. And my memory of the UK, I visit occasionally, but my memory of the culture of the UK is that we actually are very accepting of, we have like Auntie Beeb, etc. We like these kind of monolithic institutions making decisions for us and serving us pap, and we just have to hope that the people pulling the levers have our best interests at heart. And it just seems that in the UK, those huge influential organisations that are just unaccountable almost, the BBC's my big bugbear basically, they wield inordinate amount of unaccountable power where, it's a bit of a myth in the US, but they vote for the dog catcher. They don't any longer, but it still rings true that that's in their DNA somewhere, that they do not want to be, sort of oppressed by the man. Whereas in the UK, that's my prejudice about the UK, is it feels like we do like to be nannied.
Well, I think if when it comes to the law and public institutions which are funded by the taxpayer, I think free speech is better protected in the US than it is in the UK, partly because of the First Amendment. That's undoubtedly true. But actually, the greatest threats to free speech are not from the state anymore. Across the Anglosphere, the greatest threats to free speech are in the civil arena. It's in non-state universities. It's in private media companies like Twitter and Facebook. It's in the private sector. It didn't used to be in the private sector. The private sector, as recently as 15 years ago, was a kind of small c counterweight to the largely socialist public sector, the world of universities and, to a lesser extent, the media and the public realm. That was small s socialist for the most part, but the private sector was small c conservative. In the past 15 years, that's changed. And you've seen this kind of woke, postmodern, neo-Marxist gobbledygook seep into the private sector, largely through the kind of viral portal has been HR departments. But no one at board level or at management level has really done much to resist it. They've allowed themselves, to be taken over by these body snatchers. And that means that essentially it's in the private realm, the non-state realm, that the real threats to free speech are at the moment. And it's harder to know what to do about that. I mean, how do you, particularly if you're a conservative, what do you do about the fact that Twitter will now essentially kick someone off their platform if they challenge, even the most extreme bits of kind of trans orthodoxy? If you're a conservative, you don't want the state to intervene to insist that a private company uphold, the First Amendment, because, that would be state interference in a private company. On the other hand, you can't just stand idly by while this major platform, which kind of has such a huge impact on the national conversation, is essentially kind of controlled by kind of woke libtards. So what do you do about it? It's a conundrum.
Well, for me, the simple short-term fix would be to acknowledge that these things are publishers, not utilities.
I think that the risk is that if you accept the principle that the internet should be as heavily regulated as other aspects of the media, then you're essentially giving the state a license to control platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And inevitably, the people who gravitate towards regulatory bodies are, puritanical, censorious, progressive busybodies who will essentially clean up the wild west that is the internet. And in their minds, they'll be morally cleansing what they see as a kind of toxic, polluted environment. But what that will mean is that any dissenting, maverick, non-conformist voices will just be kicked off. So I think that's the risk there.
Well, yeah, look, these things have become the new... I was saying this to somebody the other day. It's just like, look, Parliament is called Parliament because that, in effect, was the closest you can get to the internet at that point. It was a room where everybody could meet and talk. And these bodies, Twitter, etc., have become the new town hall. They've global town halls now. And there is an element where they should be treated as such. I'm not saying that the state needs to control them. It's just like, but they should have... The individual should have the same recourse to law and acknowledge that this is public speech. You shouldn't be able... I don't think you should be able to be banned from Twitter without legal redress, for instance.
Well, one of the reasons that companies like Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, he's in favor of the regulation of social media. And the reason he's in favor of it is because Facebook enjoys this huge monopoly. And because it's such a wealthy company, it can very easily put the compliance procedures in place if there is state regulation of social media, and it can employ people to make sure those rules are complied with. But much smaller companies wouldn't be able to afford to do that, so they just go out of business. So it essentially entrench Facebook's monopoly position. So I'm a bit nervous about it from that point of view as well. Now, there is something over here. The British government introduced a white paper, which is a prelude to the introduction of legislation. And the white paper is called Online Harms. It was unveiled last year and proposed the creation of a new internet regulator. But one of the things, and it had these kind of extraordinarily draconian tools it was proposing to equip this new regulator with. So, for instance, if a social media company like Twitter is found to be in breach of the new regulator's rules, the regulator could fine it 10% of its annual earnings. I mean, just an extraordinarily kind of punitive fine. But if you look at the rules that are being proposed in this white paper, they include things like no content deemed to be offensive. It's like, well, that almost takes care of 99% of Twitter. So what we get in the UK, would be this kind of anodyne, bland, almost entirely uninteresting version of Twitter, because they wouldn't dare be fined 10% of their global revenue, or they may just pull out of the UK and ban it in the UK altogether in response. Anyway, so this was a ludicrously over-the-top, ill-thought-out, blunt instrument that the UK government is thinking of introducing. So, if we are going to regulate the internet, we need to think, or social media in particular, we need to think extremely carefully about how we're going to do it.
The only other recourse then is exactly what you are doing, which is fighting fire with fire. Your the free speech. What's the name of it again? I just want to make sure.
It's called the Free Speech Union.
This Free Speech Union.
I call it FSU, but over there I think that stands for Florida State University.
Go F! Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are. I mean, this is the point. Yeah, you're not just railing against the injustice. You're actually doing something, and you're doing something. Really at a high level here. I mean, this is going to be certainly a well thought out and very highly motivated body that you've created.
Well, yeah, I myself was cancelled at the beginning of 2018. So I was appointed to, funnily enough, to a regulator. The Conservative government created a new higher education regulator called the Office for Students. And because of my involvement in charter schools over here, I was appointed to this new regulator. And as soon as I was appointed, the offence archaeologists went to work, started sifting through everything I'd said or written dating back to 1987. Literally, one person dug up an essay I'd written in 1987 and sort of pulled a few things out of context to demonstrate I wasn't a suitable person to serve in this kind of elevated public position. And I'll give you an example. The offence archaeologist trawled through everything I'd written for The Spectator, and they trawled through The Spectator's digital archive, which dates back to 1828, because The Spectator is the longest continuously published magazine in the English language. It's about to celebrate its 200th anniversary. They trawled through and the top 10 most searched for pieces in The Spectator archive during this period, this feverish week in which everyone was trying to discredit me. The top 10 most searched for articles were all by me. Someone found a piece I'd written in 2001 in which I praised this kind of tacky late night obscure cable show on this channel that's now gone bust called Men and Motors, which featured kind of topless girls draping themselves over fast cars. Not the sort of thing you'd see on TV these days, but back then you could find it, in the nether regions of your TV dial. And anyway, so I praised this show in my Spectator column, and the sub-editor of The Spectator put at the top of this column, "Confessions of a Porn Addict." And, I thought it was quite funny at the time, didn't really care. And then some little online metal detectorist, some little cop, digital cop, found this piece in The Spectator's archive after searching for kind of weeks, or at least hours, and took a screen grab, put it on Twitter, the headline confession. And then, literally half an hour later, the Evening Standard on page 3, pressure mounts on Theresa May as university czar confesses to being porn addict. It was like I'd confessed the previous night, under pressure in a police cell or something. And it was just ridiculous. And, within a week, my appointment had been debated in Parliament. An online petition had attracted more than 220,000 signatures. There was a Guardian reporter was stationed permanently at the end of my driveway. I would have brought him a cup of tea, but I'd run out of almond milk. So I resigned. I resigned from this regulator that I'd been appointed to, thinking that would draw a line under it. But as we now know, that's like throwing a hunk of raw meat to a shoal of piranha fish. The mob went absolutely crazy with bloodlust when they saw they got me to resign from one position. So in fairly short order, I had to resign from another 4 positions. So I was well and truly cancelled, defenestrated, tossed out by a digital outrage mob. So I know what it's like. I've been at the blunt end, the sharp end, rather, of this phenomenon. So I'm highly motivated to protect others who find themselves in a similar predicament.
This is. I'm really not trying to be flippant, but so basically, you've held high office and resigned from it. Who do you resign to in that position? Who do you I've reconsidered my position, and I am now standing down from this august body. Who do you actually send that? Was it an email? Do you have to phone somebody?
I sent an email to the editor of the Today program, which is the leading radio current affairs flagship BBC show, which is broadcast from 6 a.m. every morning. So I think I sent an email to them saying I decided to step down from the Office for Students, and it led the news bulletins for the rest of the day, if you can believe it.
But did you not write to the Office for Students? Did you?
I think I did. Yeah, I let the chairman and chief executive of the Office of Students know first, and I think I notified Downing Street, who of course had been leaning on me to do exactly that.
Yeah, that's what I mean, though. I mean, so how did they lean on you? What do you get? Phone calls? Do people kind of say, "Well, old chap, it doesn't reflect badly on you, but it might"?
Well, you communicate with a variety of people, mainly in the on the comms side. I'll tell you one funny story, Paul, which is at the height of this furore, the Prime Minister was due to appear on Ma, which is the a current affairs show on Sunday mornings, in which Andrew Marr, one of the leading journalists in the UK, interviews kind of politicians and public figures. And she knew she'd be asked about my appointment to the Office for Students and whether she was going to, sack me or demand my resignation, or whether she was going to kind of let all this stuff slide. And the head of comms in Downing Street, before she went on, thought because she's going to be asked about it, he had to read out some of my more kind of sophomoric tweets. So poor old Theresa May, who's not famous for her sense of humour, had to sit there while he read out these kind of these bad taste jokes I'd made late at night, in which the offence archaeologists had dug up and kind of said, "How can you possibly employ a man who would make a joke like this?" And the poor Prime Minister had to sit there, with a puzzled expression on her face, trying to sort of get her head around these kind of terrible sophomoric gags I'd made at sort of 2 a.m. after several bottles of wine. Deary me. And you'd think that heads of state would have something better to do, wouldn't you? But there it is. This is the age we live in, Paul.
It is the age we live in. Listen, it's a badge of honour, mate. I think that's amazing that you went through that. But listen, it's all about the Free Speech Union now. I'm joining immediately if it's online.
Fantastic.
Listen, I can't thank you enough for talking to me today. I'm going to let you get back to more important things than talking to me, but it's been an absolute delight and privilege, and thank you for your time.
Cheers. No, it's been a pleasure.
Bless you.